just declare her permanently paralyzed. My own mother's voice hissed cold and flat right at the foot of my bed. Next to her, my younger sister gave a triumphant little smirk. To them, I wasn't flesh and blood. I was just the perfect test subject to lock down a multi-million-dollar medical implant contract. Acid burned in my throat, but I couldn't scream. My body had been dead from the neck down for 6 months, but my mind wasn't. Gathering every last drop of my drained energy, I controlled the only thing left that still took my orders. My eyes. Blink. Short. Long. Short. A desperate SOS Morse code. My mother and sister turned and walked away, completely certain this corpse was harmless. But in the corner of the room, the male nurse holding an IV bag suddenly froze. His eyes went dark, locking onto my eyelids in 3 seconds of dead silence. Then he tapped his fingers against the bed rail. Exactly 3 times, leaned down and whispered the one word that sent my blood pressure spiking. Valkyrie. The word slipped through his teeth. Just a breath, but it hit me harder than a closed fist. The heart rate monitor next to my bed immediately gave me away. Beep. 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 The rhythm jumped loud and frantic in the dead quiet of the room. I stared up at the male nurse. His name tag read Julian. Dark bags bruised the skin under his eyes, and his knuckles were thick, covered in old white scars. He didn't look at me with that sickening, tilt-headed pity the rest of the hospital staff used. He looked at me with cold, flat calculation. It was the look of someone confirming a body. He knew who I was. I forced my heavy eyelids to move. I closed them, held it for 1 full second. Opened them. Slow, deliberate. I am in here. Julian didn't smile. He turned his back to the door and moved fast. He completely ignored the blood pressure cuff. Instead, his calloused hand snatched the plastic clipboard from the foot of my bed. The heavy stench of industrial rubbing alcohol hung in the air, mixing with the sickeningly sweet smell of the floor wax. Out in the hallway, the sharp clack-clack-clack of my mother's designer heels was already fading, walking away from the daughter she had just thrown in the trash. Julian's eyes darted from the paper chart to the metal IV stand. A pale yellow liquid dripped down the clear plastic tube, disappearing into the bruised vein in the back of my hand. He stepped closer. His rough thumb pressed into the thick paper label stuck to the side of the IV bag. He scratched at it hard. The adhesive peeled back, revealing a second half-faded barcode printed directly onto the plastic underneath. Julian's jaw locked. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He squeezed the IV bag. The plastic crinkled sharply. Lying there trapped inside my own skull, a bitter taste flooded the back of my throat. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It was just finally clear. My mind dragged me back to Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. The suffocating heat of the dining room. The smell of heavy gravy masking the tension. The sharp, grating sound of silver forks scraping against expensive porcelain plates. Eleanor had looked at me across the table, her eyes filled with absolute disgust. She didn't see a daughter sitting there, she saw a bad investment. "You're wasting the family bloodline," she had snapped, taking a slow sip of her red wine. "I need someone to run the medical foundation, not someone playing in the dirt." To her, I was just a pawn. Out in the blinding heat, strangers I barely knew had thrown their bodies over mine to shield me from flying metal. But here in this freezing air-conditioned room, my own mother was signing papers to slowly kill me just to secure millions in funding for her foundation's research. I wasn't paralyzed because my spine was broken. I was paralyzed because my own bloodline wanted me dead but needed me breathing just enough to cash the checks. I was a broken appliance they kept plugged in just for the warranty money. Julian leaned over me. His fingers grabbed the small plastic wheel on the IV line. His knuckles turned white. With a harsh twist, he spun the valve backward. The pale yellow drip stopped instantly. "They are pumping nerve blockers into you," he muttered, his voice barely a rasp. "Locking you inside your own body." He reached up and grabbed the heavy privacy curtain, violently yanking it around the bed. The thick fabric whipped through the air, cutting us off from the door. The air grew heavy. My lungs tightened as my heartbeat slammed against my ribs. Then the heavy brass door handle of the VIP suite clicked. The cold metallic sound echoed perfectly over the monitor's rhythmic beeping. The handle turned all the way down. Someone was walking in. The heavy door clicked open. The stagnant smell of rubbing alcohol was instantly crushed by a sickeningly sweet wave of expensive floral perfume. Chloe. She didn't walk in alone. The family lawyer trailed right behind her, a guy who always sweated through the collar of his tailored suits. Julian moved immediately. He dropped his shoulders, rounding his spine and slouching his neck. He erased every hard, disciplined line in his posture, instantly blending into the background as just another exhausted, underpaid graveyard shift nurse scribbling on a plastic clipboard. Chloe walked straight to the edge of my bed. She didn't look at my face. She didn't look at my eyes. She stared right past me, her gaze locked on the glowing green numbers of the heart monitor, like she was checking the battery life on a broken machine. "She looks so peaceful," Chloe drawled. Her voice was thick and plastic, the exact same fake tone she used to solicit donations at country club dinners. She reached out with 2 fingers and pinched the edge of my thin cotton blanket, tugging it up a single inch. My eyes dropped to her wrist. The harsh fluorescent ceiling light bounced right off the scratched glass of a heavy black dive watch. My watch. The one I bought with my very first hazard paycheck, paid for with dirt, sweat, and split lips. The heavy nylon strap was pulled dangerously tight, wrapping awkwardly around her fragile, manicured wrist. It sat there like a stolen trophy. She had stripped my apartment, boxed up my entire life, and taken everything I ever worked for. I knew exactly how she justified it to her friends. She was just safekeeping family assets, while her poor sister rested. My jaw ached from how hard I wanted to clench it, but my muscles remained totally dead. The lawyer cleared his throat, pulling a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his sweaty nose. He didn't look at me either. "The conservatorship papers are finalized, Director," he said. His voice was flat, carrying the exact same bored, calculated tone a bank manager uses to foreclose on a ruined house. "We can move her down to the Foundation's bioresearch facility at 4 o'clock this afternoon. All experimental injections will be legally cleared under the new Guardian waiver. The paperwork is airtight." 4 o'clock, down to the bioresearch facility. That meant a basement room. No windows, no visitors, no security cameras, just a breathing corpse they could pump full of test drugs and harvest data from until my heart finally gave out. Chloe nodded, already pulling her phone out of her designer purse. "Good. Tell the staff to prep the discharge paperwork." She turned her back to me, her thumbs flying across her screen. She just signed my death warrant, and she was already answering emails. Lying there paralyzed on that stiff mattress, watching my own flesh and blood steal my life and wear my hard-earned watch like a cheap bracelet, I felt a rage so cold it burned my throat. Have you ever had someone you share blood with take something that meant everything to you just because they felt entitled to it? If you know exactly how that sick betrayal feels, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Just comment the word "stolen" so I know I'm not alone in this fight. The heavy brass door clicked shut. The deadbolts snapped into place. They were gone, leaving only that nauseating perfume hanging in the cold air. Julian dropped the plastic clipboard onto the rolling table. It hit with a sharp smack. The tired, slumped posture vanished. His spine straightened. His breathing slowed down to a deep, controlled rhythm. In through the nose, out through his mouth. He stepped closer to the head of my bed. He didn't say a word, but his dark eyes locked onto mine. He knew exactly what a 4 o'clock transfer to an unmonitored basement meant. We were out of time. The discharge order was already in the system. Julian reached over my head. His rough, scarred fingers gripped the thick seams of the spare hospital pillow. If we were going to break that discharge order, he was going to have to hurt me. Julian didn't hesitate. The heavy brass door had barely clicked shut behind my sister. He leaned over the stiff mattress, sliding his bare, calloused hand under the nape of my neck. He didn't speak. He just dragged his heavy thumb across the sharp ridge of my jawline. One hard scrape, a warning. Then he grabbed the thick foam wedge supporting my damaged spine and violently yanked it out. He shoved my head forward, snapping my chin down to my chest at a sickening, unnatural angle. My body reacted before my brain could even process the movement. Autonomic dysreflexia, a violent short circuit in a broken nervous system. The pain didn't build. It detonated. A blinding white spike of pure agony shot straight up my spinal cord and slammed into the base of my skull. The pressure inside my head inflated like a cheap, overfilled tire about to blow out. My blood pressure skyrocketed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a brutal, erratic thumping that felt like it was cracking bone. Cold sweat instantly soaked my hairline, dripping down into my eyes, stinging them shut. The damp hospital gown clung to my freezing skin. The heart monitor beside me didn't just beep. It shrieked, a sustained, ear-splitting red alarm. Code blue. I didn't make a single sound. I clamped my jaws together until the joints ground tight, biting down on the inside of my cheek, until I tasted hot, thick copper. Years ago, I had laid in the scorching dirt with a shattered femur, biting a dirty leather strap without shedding a single tear. Now I was suffocating on a sterile hospital bed, torturing my own flesh, risking a massive stroke just to escape the greed of my younger sister. The door handle violently rattled. Chloe burst back into the room, the sweaty lawyer stumbling blindly behind her, her polished country club mask completely shattered. Her face drained of color, turning a pasty, sickly gray under the harsh fluorescent lights. The heavy stench of her sweet perfume clashed with the sharp smell of my cold sweat. "What the hell is happening to her?" Chloe screamed. Her voice cracked shrill and ugly. She shrank back against the doorframe, her expensive leather purse slipping off her shoulder and hitting the linoleum floor. Julian didn't look like a tired graveyard nurse anymore. He turned on her, his dark eyes burning. His voice was a low, deafening roar that completely swallowed her pathetic screaming. "Autonomic dysreflexia. Her nervous system is crashing." Julian stepped toward her, his physical presence dominating the small space. He slammed a heavy fist onto the metal rolling table. The plastic trays jumped and clattered. "You just signed a forced transfer order on a highly unstable patient. You want to kill your own sister right here in front of a lawyer." Chloe choked on her own breath. Her mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. The greedy little director was suddenly terrified of a manslaughter charge. Before she could stammer a single excuse, the heavy double doors were kicked wide open. The rapid response team flooded the suite. 3 nurses and a breathless resident doctor pushed aggressively past Chloe, shoving her out into the cold hallway like she was trash in the way. Chaos swallowed the room. Hands grabbed my arms. Someone jammed a thick plastic syringe into my IV line, pushing heavy sedatives. The deafening alarm was manually muted, replaced by the frantic overlapping shouting of the medical staff. The discharge order was instantly voided. You don't move a crashing patient to an unmonitored basement. We bought our time. Julian was pushed hard against the wooden headboard, shoved out of the way of the heavy crash cart. In the middle of the screaming and the tangled wires, he leaned his head down. His lips brushed a fraction of an inch from my sweaty ear. "Hold on," he whispered, his voice a cold razor cutting right through the noise. "Sterling is waiting at the scanner downstairs. If they catch us doing this, we both go to federal prison." Arthur Sterling stood inside, his wrinkled hands shoved deep into the pockets of his wrinkled white coat. He was old, notoriously difficult to work with, and the only doctor in this entire building who openly despised my mother. Julian locked the brakes on the gurney with the toe of his shoe. "You're betting both of our medical licenses on this haze," Sterling grumbled. His voice was gravelly, worn out from too many graveyard shifts and cheap hospital coffee. Julian didn't flinch. A loud, violent, rhythmic knocking that sounded like a heavy steel hammer smashing against a concrete wall. Thud, thud, thud. The noise rattled my teeth. I closed my eyes and let the darkness press down on me completely at the mercy of the loud machine. 10 minutes later, the tray slid out. The deafening noise stopped. The room felt uncomfortably quiet. Sterling was standing behind the thick glass window of the control booth. Through the glass, I watched the pale blue light of the diagnostic monitor wash over his tired, lined face. He leaned closer to the screen. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Son of a bitch," Sterling whispered. The curse slipped out raw and bitter. Julian was beside him in an instant. "Epidural hematoma." Sterling pointed a bony finger at the glowing blue screen. "Massive blood clot. It's compressing the C4 vertebrae. Look at the margins right here. This size. It is completely operable. Surgical decompression could relieve the spine. Julian crossed his thick arms over his chest. His jaw locked tight. The file from 6 months ago noted 0 operable lesions. Sterling let out a dry, humorless laugh. That file was gutted, completely scrubbed. Lying on the cold tray, staring up at the water-stained ceiling tiles, the truth hit me harder than the physical pain. It didn't hurt to know my spine was crushed by a blood clot. What tore my chest open was knowing the truth. My mother saw this exact same image 6 months ago. Eleanor looked at a fixable problem, looked at her paralyzed daughter, and decided that the insurance money and the research grants were worth more than my legs. She deliberately chose to leave me rotting in that bed. Sterling walked out of the booth and stood over me. His old sharp eyes looked right into mine. "I can cut your neck open and pull this clot out," Sterling said, his voice stripped of any bedside manner. "It's a high-risk spinal surgery. You could bleed out on the table, but if you survive, you get your body back." There was no hesitation, not a single trace of fear. I dropped my eyelids. One hard, deliberate blink. Cut me open. Julian stepped up and kicked the brake release. The gurney jerked forward. "Let's move," Julian said. Operating room 4 is empty. We rolled out of the MRI suite and headed straight for the main elevator bank. Julian hit the button for the surgical floor. The metal doors slid shut, sealing us in the steel box. We were going to fix it. We were going to undo my mother's death sentence. The elevator chimed. Floor 3. The metal doors slid open. Julian froze. His hands clamped down on the metal rails of my bed. Standing right there, blocking the exit to the surgical hallway, was my mother. The elevator chimed. A sharp, dry ding. The metal doors slid open to the 3rd floor. Neurosurgery. Julian pushed my gurney forward, but the rubber wheels stopped dead after 2 feet. 4 massive guys in cheap black suits stood shoulder to shoulder, completely blocking the narrow hallway. Behind that wall of meat stood my mother, Eleanor Carter. It was past 2 in the morning, but she looked ready to host a charity gala. A heavy beige cashmere coat draped over her shoulders. A string of real pearls choked her neck. The suffocating powdery stench of Chanel No. 5 rolled into the elevator, instantly overpowering the sharp smell of rubbing alcohol and iodine on my skin. She didn't look like a frantic mother terrified for her sick daughter. She looked like a cold-blooded CEO who just caught an employee walking out with stolen company property. Eleanor didn't even look at my face. She held up a thick stack of stapled papers, snapping them aggressively in the cold air. "Dr. Sterling," she hissed through her perfect teeth, "you are violating federal law." Sterling didn't back down. The old doctor stepped out of the elevator, his white coat catching the harsh overhead lights. "Her spine is being crushed by a hematoma, Eleanor. Delaying the surgery is outright manslaughter." My mother let out a short, ugly laugh. She waved the legal papers right in the old man's face. "I am her sole guardian under the state conservatorship. Every medical decision, every single pill she swallows, requires my signature. You will take her back to the VIP suite right now, or I will ruin your medical license before the sun comes up." She didn't care about the blood clot. She just wanted her compliant, paralyzed paycheck back in her bed. Eleanor flicked her chin at the 4 men in suits. "Take the bed." The heavy men stepped forward, their leather shoes squeaking against the tile floor. Julian moved faster. He stepped right in front of the nose of my gurney, placing his body directly between my paralyzed frame and the suits. He planted his boots shoulder-width apart, locking his knees. His spine was perfectly straight. He didn't raise his fists, but his entire body turned to solid, unmovable concrete. "You don't touch her," Julian growled. The air in the hallway went completely freezing. Eleanor's face twisted in pure, unhinged disgust. She stepped right up to the nurse. Smack! She slapped him. With everything she had. The violent sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed loudly off the hard tile walls. The heavy force of it snapped Julian's face to the side. A bright red handprint instantly flared on his pale cheek. The corner of his mouth split open, and a thick drop of dark blood rolled down his chin, dripping onto his scrubs. Julian didn't blink. He didn't take a single step backward. He just slowly turned his head, fixing his cold, dead eyes right back on my mother. Lying on the gurney, a sick, suffocating wave of humiliation washed over me. I couldn't move a single muscle. Out in the dirt, if someone cornered me, I could fight back. I could defend myself. But here, trapped in my own ruined body, I had to watch a complete stranger take a bleeding split lip just to protect my wheelchair, while my own mother treated my life like a piece of garbage. Have you ever felt completely trapped by a toxic family member? Someone who uses legal papers, money, or pure manipulation to control every single aspect of your life. If you know the suffocating pain of being treated like a piece of property by your own blood, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop the word control in the comments below. Let me know I'm not alone. Eleanor's chest heaved. Her polished mask was completely gone. "Drag this trash out of my way," she screamed at her guards. The four suits lunged forward, reaching their thick hands out to grab Julian by the shoulders. But before a single punch could be thrown, a heavy rhythmic sound echoed from the pitch-black end of the hallway. Clack, clack, clack. Heavy steel-toed boots slamming against the linoleum, stepping in perfect unified time. Someone was coming out of the dark. "Get your hands off my people." The deep, heavy voice hit the tiled walls like a physical blow. The four men in cheap suits froze. Their thick fingers were inches from Julian's scrubs, but they didn't dare touch him. Major General Marcus Thorne stepped out of the dark end of the hallway, right under the harsh fluorescent lights. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. Right behind him was Colonel David Vance, gripping a heavy brown manila folder. Following them in perfect silent unison were four military police guards. The MPs didn't draw their weapons. They just stood there. Cold, silent, their heavy hands resting naturally near their holsters. Their posture instantly shrank the hallway, suffocating the paid security thugs until the heavy suits slowly backed away, dropping their hands to their sides. Eleanor's face lost every drop of color. Her flawless, expensive makeup suddenly looked like a cheap mask painted over pale, frightened skin. Colonel Vance stepped forward. He completely ignored her shifting, panicked eyes. He opened the stiff cardboard folder. Under the provisions of Article 32 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Vance read, his voice completely flat and hollow. "The Pentagon officially revokes all civilian medical conservatorship over Captain Sophia Carter, pending an immediate investigation into malicious endangerment." He closed the folder with a sharp, heavy snap. "She falls under our jurisdiction now." Eleanor's mouth opened. For a split second, she looked like a fish suffocating on a dry dock. "You can't do this," she stammered, her voice shrill and desperate, cracking under the pressure. "I am her mother. I have the court order." General Thorne didn't let her finish. He stepped right into her personal space. The heavy gold stars on his shoulders gleamed. He looked down at her, his eyes like two pieces of rough gray concrete. "Mrs. Carter," Thorne said softly, dangerously softly, "if you or these rented thugs take one more step toward that bed, I will personally put you in steel handcuffs for the attempted murder of a United States service member. Step back, now." Eleanor stopped breathing. The heavy beige cashmere coat seemed to swallow her shoulders as she physically shrank. The arrogant CEO, the woman who had signed my life away just to secure a funding check, was completely broken by a single, unbending man in a green uniform. Lying on the gurney, I felt a heavy, bitter knot dissolve in my chest. For 6 months, I was a prisoner in my own family's house. My own blood had tried to bury me. But these strangers, these men with rough hands and iron discipline, had just walked into a hospital at 2 in the morning to stand between me and the monster who gave birth to me. I focused every ounce of energy I had left. The muscles in my face were heavy, stiff, like cold clay, but I forced them to move. Just a fraction. The left corner of my mouth pulled up. A slow, silent smirk. I didn't blink. I just stared right at my mother's terrified, pale face and smiled. It was the cruelest, coldest thing I had ever done. And it felt amazing. Julian didn't waste a single second. He turned his back on my mother, grabbed the heavy metal rails of the gurney, and pushed me hard through the double doors of the operating room. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off the sight of Eleanor Carter standing frozen in the hallway. Inside the surgical suite, the air was freezing. The massive overhead lights were already blazing blindingly bright. Dr. Sterling stood by the metal table, snapping a pair of sterile latex gloves over his wrinkled hands. He didn't look relieved. He looked grim. He leaned over the gurney, his old eyes dark. "We have a problem," Sterling said, looking up at Julian. "I just ran her pre-op blood work. Whatever garbage her sister has been pumping into her IV line, it's completely saturated her system." Sterling grabbed a heavy plastic mask from the anesthesia machine. "The second I push this sedative," he whispered, "her heart might just stop." The heavy doors of Operating Room 4 sealed shut. The massive overhead surgical lights snapped on, casting a blinding, sterile glare straight through my eyelids. Dr. Sterling stood at the head of the metal table, his voice tight behind his surgical mask. "Pushing anesthesia. Let's just pray her heart can handle whatever garbage they've been pumping into her." The cold, heavy liquid flooded my IV line. My vision instantly blurred. The sharp edges of the room melted away. Julian stepped into my fading line of sight. He didn't offer a reassuring smile. He just stared down at me, his dark eyes locked onto mine. "Fight." Then everything went black. The anesthesia dragged me under, but it didn't shut my brain off. It trapped me in a raw, broken loop of memories. I felt the freezing shock of iodine wash down the back of my neck, then the sharp, burning slice of the scalpel. The physical pain immediately triggered the hallucination. The sterile operating room faded, replaced by the heavy, suffocating smell of roasted meat and expensive wine. Thanksgiving. The night I signed the papers to go back overseas. Crash! The deafening sound of a heavy crystal glass shattering against the hardwood floor. "You bring absolutely zero profit into this house," Eleanor's voice screamed in the dark, completely unhinged. "You are useless, just hiding in a uniform to embarrass this family." Her words didn't just echo. They morphed into the heavy plastic syringes that had been shoved into my IV line for the last 6 months. Every insult was a deliberate, calculated dose of poison. I wasn't paralyzed because of a rock slide. I was paralyzed because my mother and sister were greedy enough to rot my body from the inside out just to cash a check. My awareness slowly drifted back to the surface. The sharp metallic click-clack of surgical clamps. The heavy metallic smell of fresh blood mixed with the suffocating burnt hair stench of the electrocautery pen. "I have the clot." Sterling's voice echoed, muffled and heavy. "Look at the surrounding tissue. It's necrotic. And the smell, that is pure chemical solvent." Someone has been continuously pushing heavy nerve blockers directly into her cervical spine. They were deliberately stopping her body from healing. "Director Chloe." Julian's voice replied, cold and flat as a concrete floor. I heard the sharp snap of a heavy plastic lid. Julian was sealing the necrotic tissue inside an evidence jar. They had the physical proof. The exact chemical fingerprint of my sister's crime. The heavy fog in my brain started to lift. The surgery was over. Lying there on the cold metal table, I felt something I hadn't felt in 6 months. A deep, agonizing, electric tingling sensation. It felt like 1,000 rusted needles crawling down my lower back. I was alive. The spine was free. But before I could even process the feeling, a harsh burst of static shattered the quiet room. Julian's black radio buzzed loudly on his hip. "Hayes, copy." Colonel Vance's voice cut through the static, rushed and tight. Eleanor and Chloe slipped the lockdown. They just called Liam Bennett down to the B2 parking garage. "Liam, my fiancé. They are cornering him right now," Vance barked over the radio. "They are lying to his face, using his civilian status to force him to sign an immediate transfer of guardianship. If he signs that paper, they walk out of this hospital with her before our federal hold clears." I was back in the intensive care unit. The heavy glass door was pulled shut, sealing out the noise of the hospital. The anesthesia was draining out of my system, leaving behind a sharp, burning ache in the back of my neck. But underneath that dull throb, there was something else. A harsh, electric buzzing. Like 1,000 rusty needles dragging down my spine, spreading into my arms. I pushed every ounce of my focus into my right hand. The brain fired the command. My forearm twitched. The rough cotton sheet pulled tight against my skin. Slowly, painfully, my index finger dragged across the mattress. 1 single millimeter. I moved. The heavy glass door suddenly jerked open. Colonel Vance stepped inside. His jaw was set like a vice. His heavy boots squeaked against the clean floor. Eleanor and Chloe slipped the lockdown. Vance said, his voice hard. They couldn't get past the guards at the main entrance, so they went down to the B2 parking garage. They called Liam Bennett. Liam. My chest went completely hollow. Liam was a good architect, a nice guy, but he was painfully naive. He believed every fake tear my mother ever squeezed out. They are cornering him in the basement right now. Vance continued, his eyes darting to the monitor. They are using his status as your fiancé to bypass the military hold. If he signs that civilian medical waiver, they can legally throw her in a private ambulance before the federal paperwork clears. They were going to use the man I love to sign my death warrant. My eyes snapped wide open. The monitors beeped faster. Julian was standing right next to the bed. I forced my hand to move again, my trembling fingers hooked into the side of his scrub shirt. I grabbed the fabric hard. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just stared up at him. My eyes locked onto his, cutting through the sterile air of the room. Stop him. Don't let him sign. Julian didn't need me to speak. The quiet, exhausted nurse vanished. His posture shifted, going completely rigid, his weight dropping low into his heels. He reached down and unclipped the heavy black two-way radio from his belt. He leaned over the bed and placed the plastic radio right next to my pillow, inches from my ear. Listen closely, Julian whispered. He didn't wait for a response. He spun around and bolted out the door. The heavy glass slammed shut behind him. The ICU room went dead quiet. The only sound left was the slow rhythmic beep of my heart monitor and the harsh crackling static pouring out of the black plastic radio on my pillow. Down in the B2 garage, the air would be thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and damp concrete. I could picture it perfectly. Eleanor clutching her cashmere coat playing the desperate mother. Chloe shoving a pen into Liam's confused hands. And Liam, too, blind to see the monsters right in front of his face. It is a sickening feeling. Watching someone you love get completely manipulated by a toxic family member because they are just too naive to see the truth. Have you ever had a partner or a friend blindly trust the exact person who was destroying your life? If you know how infuriating that weakness is, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop the word "Neve" in the comments below. Let me know I am not the only one who had to deal with this. I stared at the white ceiling tiles, completely paralyzed, listening to the static. Then the radio violently cracked open. The agonizing screech of burning rubber echoed through the small speaker. A heavy set of tires locking up hard against solid concrete. Julian had arrived. The black plastic radio crackled loudly against my pillow. Through the heavy static, Eleanor's voice echoed off the concrete walls of the parking garage. Shrill. Urgent. Just sign it, Liam. Sign the paper if you want to save her. The rough sound of thick paper sliding across the hood of a car scraped through the speaker. Liam was actually going to do it. Then a heavy, sickening thud vibrated through the radio. Julian didn't yell, "Stop." He didn't introduce himself. He just hit them. I laid perfectly still in the ICU bed, listening to the brutal mechanical efficiency of the violence. A sharp snap of cartilage, a choked, breathless groan, a heavy body slamming into the pavement. Julian dismantled 3 thick security guards in under 10 seconds, using nothing but precise, crushing force aimed directly at their joints and throats. "What the hell are you doing?" Liam's voice finally broke through the noise, high and panicked. He sounded like a terrified kid. "Open your eyes," Julian roared back. His voice was raw, echoing like thunder. "They have been pumping nerve poison directly into her spine for 6 months. We already sealed the necrotic tissue in an evidence jar." Dead silence. The static hissed. "Liam, he's lying!" Chloe stammered, her voice shaking violently. "He's a crazy—" She didn't finish. The sudden blinding glare of heavy headlights flooded the basement. The screech of heavy tires. Doors slammed open. "Federal hold." General Thorne's voice boomed, completely swallowing the garage. "Everybody freeze." Eleanor completely lost it. The polished, untouchable CEO shattered into pieces. She screamed, a raw, ugly sound of pure entitlement being ripped away. The heavy scuffle of boots filled the radio. Then came the sound. Click, clack. The freezing metallic ratcheting of heavy steel handcuffs clamping down tight. They cuffed my mother. They cuffed my sister. Every single click of the metal teeth biting down was the sound of the Carter family empire burning to the ground. 7 hours later. The morning sun cut through the large glass window of the ICU. I was out of the bed. I sat completely upright in a heavy hospital wheelchair. My spine was braced, but the agonizing pressure in my neck was gone. The electric burning sensation in my arms had settled into a dull, manageable ache. Julian stood quietly behind my chair. He didn't look tired anymore. Down the hallway, the heavy metal doors banged open. 2 federal marshals were escorting Eleanor and Chloe out of the building. They were no longer wearing cashmere and designer perfume. They looked small, exhausted, and completely stripped of their power. As they walked past the large glass wall of my room, Eleanor stopped. She turned her head. Her expensive makeup was smeared, her eyes bloodshot and sunken. She stared right through the glass at me. She expected to see the broken, paralyzed victim she had left behind. Instead, she saw me sitting up. My left hand rested on the armrest. My fingers were wrapped tight around a thick black marker. It had taken me 20 minutes of agonizing, sweating focus to write 2 rough, jagged words on a small white, dry erase board. I didn't yell through the glass. I didn't cry. I didn't offer her a single ounce of closure. Julian stepped forward. He took the whiteboard from my lap and held it up, pressing it flat against the thick glass window. The black ink was crooked, but the message was razor sharp. You lose. Eleanor stopped breathing. Her knees buckled. She physically sagged against the marshal holding her arm, her eyes completely empty, staring at the exact moment she realized she was nothing. 1 year, 365 days since the cold steel handcuffs clicked shut on my mother's wrists. The Carter Medical Foundation was completely gutted. Federal regulators froze, the corporate accounts tore up the boardrooms, and sold the remaining assets for scrap. Eleanor and Chloe didn't get a quiet, swept-under-the-rug settlement like the rich usually do. They got 25 years in a federal penitentiary for aggravated medical fraud and attempted manslaughter. They traded their expensive cashmere coats and sickeningly sweet designer perfumes for heavy canvas jumpsuits, steel doors, and the harsh smell of industrial bleach. I got a letter from Liam a few months after the arrest. A pale, wrinkled envelope stuffed with weak, rambling apologies. He wrote about how confused he was, how my mother's tears had completely blinded him. I threw it in the kitchen trash before I even finished reading the second page. I didn't shed a single tear over him. You cannot carry a glass shield into a street fight. Liam was too fragile, too hopelessly naive for the brutal reality of my life. Letting him go stung, but it was absolutely necessary. I cut the dead weight loose to keep myself breathing. I stood quietly in the massive main lobby of the newly restructured hospital. The cheap, squeaky linoleum from the basement was gone, replaced by clean, solid slate tile. Today, I wasn't trapped in a thin, freezing hospital gown. I wore my dark green dress uniform. The fabric was pressed razor sharp. The heavy brass metals were pinned perfectly flat against my chest. Every single button was aligned with strict mechanical precision. I leaned my weight heavily onto 2 aluminum forearm crutches. The metal cuffs gripped my arms, cold and unforgiving. The dull ache in my lower spine was a constant companion, but it was my pain. I owned it. Every time I shifted, the rubber tips of the crutches squeaked slightly against the hard tile. But my feet, the exact same feet my mother had confidently declared permanently dead to the lawyers, were planted firmly on the ground. My spine was perfectly straight. My shoulders were pulled back. I was standing on my own 2 legs, rising directly out of the ashes they tried to bury me in. Heavy, confident footsteps approached from my left. Julian stopped next to me, looking out the massive glass window. He wasn't wearing faded, wrinkled graveyard scrubs anymore. He wore a crisp-pressed white coat over a dark button-down shirt. A thick plastic badge hung from his lapel, catching the morning light. Chief Medical Officer. He didn't offer a dramatic speech. He didn't give me a pitying smile. He just held out a thick paper cup. I took it. The sharp, bitter smell of black, dark roast coffee filled the space between us. I took a slow sip, letting the burning heat wash down my throat, grounding me in the present moment. We exchanged a single, quiet look. It was the silent understanding of 2 people who had survived a collapsing roof together. I learned the hardest, ugliest lesson of my life in that sterile ICU bed. Blood does not make you family. Sometimes blood is just a toxic poison disguised as love and obligation. Real family is the complete stranger who steps in front of a swinging fist to protect you when you are too broken to stand up for yourself. The heavy Boston clouds finally broke apart. Bright, warm morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass, washing over my face. The cold, suffocating grip that had crushed my chest for an entire year finally released. I smiled, a real, quiet smile. I adjusted my grip on the hard plastic handles of my crutches. I pivoted my weight, turning my back on the sterile walls that almost became my tomb. The heavy metal tips of my crutches clicked sharply against the floor as I took my first step forward. The war has just begun, I muttered to myself. Thank you all so much for walking this painful, incredible journey with me to the very end. Your support, your shared stories, and your absolute refusal to let toxic family members win have meant the world to me. Please continue to stand tall, protect your boundaries, and never let anyone silence your truth. Thank you for listening, and goodbye for now.